Hello and welcome to a random side discussion thing today. We're going to be talking about Tigana by Guy Gabriel Kay. For anybody interested, I've been working my way through Guy Gabriel Kay's work in publication order. I read the entire Fiona Tapestry trilogy first, and Tigana Song for Arbonne is next. Jared is already has been conscripted to read it along with me. So we might do a discussion for that one, and possibly for Lions of Al Rassan as well. Those will be the next two coming up at some point in the next few months. No set time. So if you're interested in reading these with us, talking about them with us, come check out the Patreon for Chris is face palming. because
Look, we all know that there's no such thing as agreeing to do one read along with Varsha. By saying yes to one, you've said yes to three or four. It's yeah.
3 or 4 per month.
But anyway, you've already heard Chris, so maybe Chris can introduce himself. Yeah.
Okay, I'm eating a Pringle, but nice. Yeah, my name's Chris Mohan from Chronicle of Chris.
Punishment.
And the punishment indeed. You pick me out of a crowd. And that's say I deserve it. From Chronicle of Chris, sometimes YouTuber. And mostly just read what Varsha tells me to read. But I'm learning to say I can't tonight. I can't come out to play tonight. I'm going to make the excuse my dad doesn't approve of my friends.
Smart man, though.
Yeah, smart man, indeed. So that's me. Steve, you're next.
Oh, wow, okay. Well, I'm Steve from Page Chewing, and I guess the Steve Talks Books YouTube channel, but mostly Page Chewing. We're doing a lot of Page Chewing podcasts, film chewing, panel chewing, all kinds of chewings. So
Panel chewing.
Yeah,
Oh,
just
okay.
the comic book stuff.
Spotlight tune.
Oh.
Spotlight chewing. Yeah, I lose track myself. And I'm just a warning to everyone listening, I'm going to bring very little to this conversation. So, but Jared, you're up next. I always bring very little, but you know.
All right, where was I? My name is Jared. Yes, and I am on the Fantasy Thinker YouTube channel, and I am a perennial guest on tons of page chewing stuff here on Page Chewing, including Speculative Speculations, which is an excellent podcast I was just listening to earlier, so it's great. Check it out.
Highly recommended.
Yep, go listen to it. None of us here have anything to do with that podcast. This is a perfectly unbiased recommendation.
I'm sort of interested. I don't want to just sort of derail the conversation, but did you put it through an AI filter so you only heard your bits? Oh, that guy's smart. That guy's really good.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Apology.
Okay, so Tigana, high-level thoughts. Jared, you said you wanted to have read something by Guy Gabriel Kay this year.
Yes,
so do you want to kick us off?
This was my first Guy Gabriel Kay, and I've been itching to get into this guy. I feel like it's a big gap in my reading repertoire, my reading history. Considering I'm a I grew up in the '80s, and my reading journey was through the '80s and '90s and so on and so forth, because I'm the old guy here. But it was something that was totally skipped over somehow, and so I was excited to get into Tigana by Guy Gabriel Kay, and I was extremely excited when I started reading it, because we had just finished 1984, and I hate that book, so I oozed into this nice and relaxed, and I really enjoyed the prose.
Yeah. It's a pretty book. It's a very nicely written book from page one. It's really beautiful. So it warms the soul. in terms of the words. I think the story's kind of got this lovely magical realism kind of sense to it the whole way through. It has that great sense of like world building, of like it's been built in front of your eyes. It's almost like that. And it has horny times as well, you know. It has had a couple of times, there's a couple of sexy times in it, and yeah, that's that was something. Normally it doesn't bother me, but it definitely was to the point that it was like one of those looking around to see if anybody's watching you reading it kind of things. Like you shouldn't be reading it, you know. That was that level of like, if anybody's seen that I was reading this, my mum would really not approve of this.
More excuses, Chris.
More excuses, yeah.
Enjoy.
I was like, look what I'm reading.
And you clearly haven't read any Emily Henry. I'm gonna put that on your reading list next. If this was embarrassing to you. Steve.
Yeah. It's my first Guy Gabriel Kay book as well. And I was excited to get into his writing. Unfortunately, this one was a miss for me.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about why. Perhaps maybe you can tell us. And once we start getting into spoilers, like, not that, you know, we usually do, we don't do non-spoiler sections, but since we're just doing high-level thoughts, yeah, I love this book. I can gush enough for both of us, Steve, because I love this book deeply. I love the themes that it dealt with, and I think to a great extent the depth with which it dealt with them, and nothing was simple, nothing was black and white, and there was such deep, heart-rending conflicts running throughout the book. Of course, I went into it with high expectations because I loved the Fiona Noir tapestry, and the beginning of it was comparatively, not on an absolute level, compared to Fiona Noir, a little bit clunky. But as I got into it, I think, yeah, this is easily one of my favorite books, and Fiona Noir tapestry made Kay one of my favorite authors ever, and Tigana just added to that. I think, like, it did not disappoint in that regard.
Yeah, you guys are right. The prose was it gave you this. It brought out this sense of the romantic tale, of magic, in love, and you had this sense of this otherworldly type kind of vague sense around the setting, even though the setting was, very quasi-historical, based upon medieval Italy. There was never any doubt that this was a tale of magic here, because I know in some of his later books that there's a lot less magic, and it's more even more history based. But this one itself, the magic is overstated right off the bat. It's the whole conflict is because of magic, and it's because of this powerful wizard who basically wipes a nation off the map, and both in physically and in the minds of the people themselves. And so that's that overarching powerful magical story, which we then get introduced to the characters affected by this, and in their quest to bring about the change. So it was nice, very nice, I thought.
Yeah, I love how it starts. I'm gonna steal a point that Carl made, our friend Carl D. Albert from you may know him from the Second Apocalypse discussions if you've been following along with us, also author of Truth of Crowns. But he made a point during the Gardens of the Moon discussion about Tigana, so I want to talk about that a little bit. He talked about how the prologue is very quiet and I guess understated. It's just this conversation between two people, and also like the sort of backdrop against which it is set. It is the eve of battle, and something you get this sense of doom, like something really bad is going to happen, like they're all prepared to die. They know that they're going into a losing battle, and the melancholy that's coming from it. And I guess the bird singing in the background, the music playing far away, the whole atmosphere that's been set in the prologue, I think that's just like setting the book off to such a great start. I loved the prologue, and I think a lot of the things about the story that it sets up there.
Yeah, I really like the corner. It sort of has like a gypsy or Romany feel, you know, because of the travelling troupe at the start, and I think that kind of setting gives it an extra sort of mysticism that sort of lends itself very well to magical realism in a way, because there is a prominent culture within the world, but that is steeped in its own kind of lore and its own kind of bits that not many people know about. It's very fringe value kind of stuff, so I think that really helps it. And again, the lyricalness of the troupe and the travelling troupe and the singing, etc., all just kind of gives that. It just seems to fit so well with the language that's been used. You know, it sort of sings off the page as well as kind of on the streets.
Yeah, yeah. And some of the descriptions of the music, they're beautiful. I think Johnny Wirtz writes some wonderful music descriptions, and this, I feel like, perhaps not quite on the same level, but it's up there for me in terms of describing the beauty with which they play the pipes. And I think it's not just individual music, like the music of an individual that's described so beautifully. It's how they all work well together, especially in that performance for the Duke at the funeral. How he talked about how they all played off of each other, and like, sure, Devin got a little bit of extra footage there, but really he was writing about how well they all played off of each other. So yeah, the music was wonderful, how the descriptions throughout the book.
Yeah, that music really plays on the aspects of courtly romance that was around during the medieval periods, and that concept of the traveling musical group based upon the troubadours of medieval times. And he uses that concept to really great effect, because he uses it for like some thematic exploration of what music does and how music brings people together, and it's tied into the music. The way music works is also tied into how fate is weaved in and out of characters' lives, and I really like how he did that. And so that the romanticism of the traveling troupe is enhanced and exaggerated in the story to bring out the fantasy of it as well, and I think he does a great job with that.
And also that the songs that they sing and how the songs are described, again, those weave into the mythology of the world and tell us about the myth of creation for this world, which also like add a lot of depth. I think the presence of gods and goddesses, sure, but also it feels like the gods could be real in this world, but we never like really actually see them. So it adds some aspect of history as well, because the mythology of Tigana, for instance, with the gift that they've been given to bind the wizards because of the coupling of the gods there or whatever, that I think adds a lot of history and mythology. So there's a lot of depth to this world as well. And for a standalone, I think that's pretty cool to achieve that sort of depth in. It's not a short book, but it's a single book, so yeah.
This is actually a quite interesting point to ask Steve. Insofar as like the start of the book, like I think the book does have some sort of like pacing problems. I do, and we'll probably get to that in a while. But the start of the book, did it grab you?
At first, I was intrigued. It started off pretty much like any other fantasy book, so it was kind of let it unravel. I think so I think there's a fine line between having really descriptive and beautiful prose like Jenny Wirtz does, and even R. Scott Baker and even Erickson sometimes can have really beautiful prose and like descriptive prose and kind of get into the purple prose or whatever. There's a fine line between that and just being over long and over like wordy for no reason. It's almost like the Stephen King side of it, where it just gets a little too wordy and a little bit too descriptive. I think where it lost me is that the characters didn't grab me. I'm a character reader, so unless there's really strong characters, this felt like more of a plot book for me. It was plot based story for me, at least the half that I read. So the characters all felt very flat and very cardboard cutout-y, and there's this big thing happening, and no one seems to really. It seems like just like everyone seems disconnected from what's happening in the world, and it just kind of, the characters just did not pull me in at all, and so that's mostly why I just couldn't connect with it, the characters, and there's a disconnect between what the plot was and what the characters were doing and saying. It just felt like there was a disconnect there, but. So yeah, when I read the reviews for this, and I thought, am I reading a different book? Because it just did not work for me. But I read the 1-star reviews, and a lot of them I felt a little bit better because a lot of them were pretty much along what I was kind of thinking. So it's like, okay, I'm not the only one. So, but I'd still like to read more GGK eventually. Just this one just didn't do it for me.
So
I'll see myself out.
no. I was gonna ask Chris, like you started that topic about the beginning of the book, so what did you think?
But it's interesting because given what the book's about, and I have to say it's a book that I've read, got to the end of, and read the author's notes at the end of it. And I don't know if anybody else read the author's notes at the end of it. So the book is actually based on Ireland. It's based on a Brian Field play called Translations, and Translations is about how the Irish language was sort of buried by English colonialism. You know, and that thing, and as he says, in a perfect world, he would have written the entire play in Irish and it would have been performed in Irish, but he did it for a Western and Northern Irish audience. Liam Neeson was in the first cast that ever was performed that, actually, as it goes. So GGK says he based it a lot on that idea that was in that play. So it's sort of forever changed the story a little bit in my head because of the end of it. But I found the characters, like I found Devon really engaging as a character from the very off, and maybe that's because the music is like, much as in Johnny's stories, it's something I really revel in as a musician, as a child growing up, and that kind of thing, and kind of seeing that side of it, and sort of thinking, God, wouldn't it be cool to go around a travelling band? Wouldn't it be cool to do all of those kind of things? So I think there's probably part of my psyche that was identifying with the young Devon in that case. And given the fact of what the book is then about, the idea that they're travelling around with no fixed abode is sort of like the whole point of the story in some ways, that they don't really belong anywhere, that they don't really have roots, and that they're constantly moving, and that they find themselves sort of caught in this other intrigue that's happening around them between the two kings and all of that kind of stuff. It's sort of like happening on the side, but not really what the book's about in some way. And it's only when the book kind of reveals that lower court Tigana stuff that it really starts to, I think, take hold of, right, it's about really people finding their home or finding their identity and things that they can grab to. And because they haven't got that at the start of the book, it's kind of that they don't feel connected or as a whole. They don't feel like they really belong wherever they're going. And I think it ends up being very beautiful. And the themes at the start sort of connect to the end for me. For me, it's the bit in the middle. Yeah. It's not so wonderful, but I think that's one of the things that I really love about the book, is that the start, and as much as I enjoyed it, is like, right, okay, this makes sense and it has purpose for me.
Yeah, I like that. I I love that connection to the traveling and being somewhat homeless, connected to their loss of a home. I didn't think of that at all. That is a really great point. And yeah, Devin as a character, I don't know, had a little bit of a, I don't want to go so far as to say love-hate relationship, but I liked him, but then like he wasn't sufficiently engaging for me. Alison was a lot more. And I think maybe Baird Dionara was my favorite, and her conflict, I guess we'll talk about it, the central conflict for her, that was my favorite thread throughout the story. But yeah, Devin, I loved how he grew up, and I sort of looked at him from a little bit of distance. I think I can think of some characters from, say, Wars of Light and Shadow that he reminded me of. But I guess he was a little too lost in himself for me to really like him as a character, I guess. But I liked his character. I didn't like him personally. So yeah, that was an interesting thing for me.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's almost like that's done on purpose. That you're not connecting to these characters because they are not connected to a home. And so there's kind of that dual, that connection going on there, that connection to a lack of connection, I should say, because they're and Kay seems to be touching on some like aspects of memory that, because the characters, even when they remember stuff, other people around them don't remember stuff. And so that's got to that has to hit some sort of psychological chord that says, I'm from here, but I can't say it. Nobody knows what it is, what I'm saying. Nobody can remember it, and so there's this memory that that runs collectively among a population of very limited people, and the rest of the population doesn't remember it. And so that's, when they finally do connect, they're reaching into that sense of home in their history and something that ties deeper than just like a plot of soil or what have you. And so I think what Chris said about the ending and how you can look back at the beginning and see how it connects, and I think that brings greater connection later on for the reader as well.
Yeah, he's quite an immature young man at the start, but again, I think a lot of that's tied to the fact that he doesn't have roots, and like where you come from determines an awful lot about the way you feel and you stand, and the things that are what's right and wrong, and how you should behave, and all of that kind of stuff. And because he's sort of like, he's a talented young man, he definitely knows what his talents are and that kind of stuff, but he hasn't really had to fit in, and he hasn't really had to fit in society, because even at the start of the story, he's very much kind of fascinated and led by his emotions. Everything that's sort of happening, it's like, oh, I feel horny, I feel like I'm sad, I feel like I want to sing, all of that kind of stuff. It's very, very young man. And I think it's interesting what you said, Varsha, because I think me as a reader, being a male, I think I sort of forgive that, because I sort of have to forgive myself for being that person when I was young as well, in a lot of ways. So you kind of are a bit more forgiving of a male character like that, but also like I can accept that they're not that great a person at the start, and even through most of the book in a lot of ways.
Yeah. He's sort of a difficult in between a main character and friendly sidekick, so to speak, or like a silly sidekick. So but as a character, he's really interesting, and as sort of one of the focal points of the story. And I feel like, again, in the beginning I talked about how the beginning felt a bit clunky to me, and one of the reasons was sort of the hyper focus on the fact that he can remember everything that ever happens to him, and yes, that memory is one of the central themes of the book, and Devin as the sort of personification of that aspect of the book, I think, is pretty interesting that it was sort of placed in this character to remember everything, and at various points in the story he offers to do the remembering for what has been forgotten, right? But then like the constant reminder of that I could have done without, and he has a certain amount of pride associated with it too, which it's like made him slightly less likable to me overall, but he grew on me, I think, eventually. So
That was it was interesting, Chris, how you brought up the afterword in being about Ireland and Irish cultures, the attempted tamping down or wiping out of it, because that's of course a common theme throughout history itself.
Indeed, yeah.
And all you got to do is look at American history for that, but but also the Cathars in southern France as well. And so Guy Kay seems to really have his finger on the pulse of that type of historical tragedy to
Indeed.
draw upon in this book, and really hammer that home.
Yeah.
and
the rebellion that goes along with it.
Yeah,
which
how
thought,
you fight back. Yeah, indeed.
yeah. So that was great too, I thought.
Yeah. And the whole idea of name being tied to identity, I think that's really interesting to me. Like a long time ago, I read The Namesake by Jhumpa Lahiri, and I didn't get it. I didn't like the book, and I didn't get it. It's about this immigrant family like that moves from India, and this names their kid Gogol after a Russian author who, like, because things happen because of which the kid is named after the author. So he has to figure out where his identity is between being named for this author, between growing up an immigrant and being trying to find his Indian roots and so on. And I just felt like they were going on about it for too long. But I feel like I would be a lot more sympathetic towards that story if I read it now, because I feel like I understand themes of identity a lot better, and Kay has really done something very beautiful with this tying of the name to identity, which of course names are important, but the loss of a name, the longing and desperation and melancholy that it gives to this whole group of people and what they want and how much is unsaid throughout the book in that context, I think is really well done. And maybe because of this book I will understand Namesake a bit more, but also I feel like I wouldn't have understood this book if I had read it when I read The Namesake.
For yourself, Varsha, like obviously at the moment isn't India talking about changing its name back to Bharat? Isn't that the idea, again, taking away the colonial name and kind of regaining the kind of idea, again, this idea of identity and name being important, like and sort of like a symbol and a way of belonging. They basically say that you belong in a place, whereas calling it something else kind of makes you always feel like you're on the outside, and it's not until you're actually in that culture that you see what difference that makes, because from the outside looking in you can kind of look at it and go, it's only a name. Like, like, how can that be important? How can that be a thing that you would fight over, or that would be so important? But actually, until you're sort of in that position yourself, I think it's very hard to know. And I think the book does a pretty good job of actually showing what it means when people do remember. And in this case, obviously through the world of fantasy, it has been robbed of them. It isn't like it's a secret. It's just literally they can't even think of it. And that bit's really cool, I think.
Well, words play a crucial role in memory, in history, and culture, and they try to convey what our other senses cannot. And remembrance is part of a powerful tool for that, and words play into remembrance. And there's a quote in the book which I really love, and it says, "Words were power. Words tried to change you, to shape bridges of longing that no one could ever really cross. And I thought that was just a great quote, and that wrapped up part of the theme of this whole book beautifully.
Yeah, I love that. And longing, I don't know if I mentioned it in the list of things that the whole loss of the name invoked, but longing, all of the characters, the first proper interaction between Katriana and Devin that we see on page, she expresses longing of some sort, like as there's a longing that he cannot read or understand when she asks him to be there for the big thing that's about to happen. Sorry, just going back briefly to what you said about the names, I think especially in colonial context, like to I'm not sure how I feel about the Bharat thing, because I'm not happy about the motivations behind that, but the other things that we've done over time, a lot of cities in India have been renamed from the names that the British gave them, or like mispronounced names became the true name. Like Kolkata was Calcutta for a long time before we changed it back to Kolkata. Same with Mumbai, used to be Bombay. And having the name that was given or mispronounced in, like, casual nonchalance, or like the sense of like not caring that they are mispronouncing the name, is like saying you're maybe saying, I don't know if this is why the names were changed, but maybe in some sense it's like saying you're okay with what was done to you, and so the fighting back and trying to change that back, I think, is significant. And I like how that ties back to this book.
Yeah, and the rebellion against the loss of a name in this book is, of course, a very powerful, heartfelt rebellion where they, something that people can rally around, because the loss of the name was not a mistake in this case. It was a very deliberate thing, and so it makes the characters' motivations very transparent and very and very in your face. There's no gray area about what their motivation is in this case.
Right. Yeah. And the speaking of memory as well, one of the opening epigraphs was about how a flame remembers. What can a flame remember? If it remembers a little less than is necessary, it goes out. If it remembers a little more than is necessary, it goes out. If only it could teach us while it burns to remember correctly. I love this opening, and how throughout the book there is a lot of imagery of the flame and the candle, and how that ties back to memory. And I can't say I fully understand a flame and memory, but it's something that maybe I do. It's something that a flame keeps something alive. As long as it burns, something is being kept alive, perhaps, or and so as long as it burns, something is remembered. Maybe that's the interpretation. I don't know, but regardless of what it means, I love the tying up of it to this theme of memory.
Well, also remember that a flame, in order to keep going, needs fuel. And so you have to fuel that memory. You have to fuel that the rebellion behind what they're doing, and so and that fuel can get burnt out and used up too fast if you're not careful, and you have to find the right ingredients to keep it burning at a steady, in order to keep it memory and remembrance as a powerful tool, and of course, and like a flame, you can use that tool for good or bad. It can be used in the wrong way, and it can be used for good as well. And you can fall into this trap of nostalgia or rigid tradition, or you can also hold on to what is dear to you as each generation kind of leaves its mark on the next. And so flame imagery is a very sneaky thing. It's not. It can burn everything up and destroy. It can keep you warm and cozy with that hot cocoa, and but you got to find that balance. And I think that's the same thing with rebellion and with what you're fighting for and memory and all that stuff. And he really brought that stuff out, especially like I think the last 100 pages were very strong in this book. I think the ending was great, and I think he wrapped stuff up very well, which he should. I mean, it's a standalone, so you should, if you're not wrapping stuff good in a standing alone, there's something wrong. But there were some parts in the middle that were a little, like you guys said, a little clunky and stuff like that. But I thought he really, what do they call it? Stuck the landing. Yeah, that's what they call it.
Yeah, it's the middle part's interesting because I think it does sag, but more because I don't know what he's doing there. You know what I mean? It isn't until much later that you get what is happening with that character and actually what's going on, and it just feels like it's kind of like holding you back from the part of the story that you want to connect with in some ways, and you're like, oh, can we not go back there? Like, what is going on with this courtship and this kind of idea that he owns these women and he's subjugating them and all that kind of stuff, and it doesn't seem to fit with the rest of the story. Now, ultimately, when we get to see what happens at the end of it, it's like, okay, as you said, Varsha, like that part of the story actually ends up becoming very interesting, but I also kind of look back at it in retrospect and go, did I need all of that exposition that kind of went in beforehand? Did I need what that was if the outcome was this? And look, it is quite a long book. It is. I'd say it's one of those classic fantasy books that you look at, or I look back in retrospect and go, did it have to be so long? Because the writing's beautiful. Did it really, benefit from drawing it out that extra 100 pages? I can see Steve sort of nodding a little bit in the background. And while I agree with you, Jared, the end of it really comes together like beautifully, I think, between the action and the ideas and things that it's trying to do, and even the magic warfare, etc., that goes on. I think it's really interesting at that point, but that bit in the middle, I just kind of felt we could have got a sense of that even by dotting it, even if it had been broken up through the book rather than kind of just the way it was done. It sort of just knocked it a little bit for me, but still a very enjoyable book.
Yeah, I think when Dianora's, I assume you mean the sections with Dianora's POV. Yeah, when her section started, I shaved a little bit because I think, and he did this at some point in the summer treat too, there was something very interesting or momentous that had just happened, and then he shifted gears to a completely different character in a completely different part of the world. But within 2 pages, I was interested in what was going on with them, even though I was mad that he dragged me and brought me all the way across here. And I think that happened with Dianora too. I wasn't happy about the change, but I got so interested in her story and the whole conflict that she has going on. Everything, I think her backstory a little bit, I could have done without that, but I got slightly bored. But everything else, like how all the things she did between when she left home and she got to Brandon's palace, I think that part was it. But I don't think it lasted very long. It was only a few pages. But her relationship with her person in the Seishan, Celto, and her conflict and how much she's struggling with it. And I don't think, it might be easy to read her indecision and her unwillingness to make the move as, she's happy with the life she has and like she's like sort of, keen to continue living or whatever. But I think it's more than that. What he has done with that part of the narrative, I think, is supremely important, which he's failed to do a little bit with the other tyrant, but he's humanified him. Like, he's not this mustache twirling evil dark lord. I don't know about you guys, but I felt bad for him at so many parts in the book. I felt for him and I understood him, which is what Dianora is desperately struggling not to do and failing at. So the angle that brought to that story, I thought was brilliant, and I was curious about where that was going to go, because at some point in the story I was like, how is this going to end where all of the characters we are following can have a happy ending, and they didn't. but what the I think the level of compassion that he brought into the story with that conflict and that angle, I think is brilliant, and that was my favorite thread throughout, and how that particular thing came to an end. Like, even how she struggled with the sea dive or the ring dive, whatever that was called. And I think she came there hoping to find a mustache twirling villain that she could just kill and be done, but she found a person that she could relate to, who loved her, or like who she was starting to like. And yeah, that was a brilliant part of the story.
Yeah, it kind of taps into the fact that once you see that somebody has a need for you in however little of a way, it changes your perspective on your relationship with them. Her situation was, man, that was rough. It was like a very difficult situation, and you really, like, she's the character I felt bad for the most, because she had every justification to off this guy, but she also had a great life because of him. And so, what do you do in that case? At first, she's kind of living under the fear that any day he could wake up and decide to have her beheaded or something. Who knows? But as it went on, you got the sense that he needed her a little more as time went on, and that need was going to interfere with her ultimate plan. And you got that sense, even though the whole time you were kind of railing against it, saying, no, don't get emotionally involved, don't do that. And I like that was a character flaw on her part, because logically she should have let him die when that guy infiltrated and the guy, I forget who it was, but the assassin got into the next to him there, and she thwarted that assassination. And the whole time you're like, no, don't get involved, and let it play out, because he's the bad guy. He is the bad guy. And but she can't do it, and you feel that compassion that she has at that moment too. You get all the justifications, and you get all the torment, emotional torment that she's going through in that moment. And I thought that part was really well done. She was a great character.
Yeah, and how it all came together in the end, like you guys said, when Valentin, when Rune turns out to be Valentin, and he looks at her with compassion because he knows what's going on with her, and he was subject to, like, he had to express Brandon's feelings towards her himself, right? Like, he had a sense of, like, the affection that was being returned. And there was a point made at some point earlier in the book when Brandon tells her that he loves her. She knows what love means to this man because of what he was willing to do for the son that he loved. So how far he's willing to go through all of that, that's what Rune was expressing. That's what Rune understood. And so when, like, there was no anger, there was compassion there. And yeah, I think that whole thing it's just fantastic. And on a similar note, when she goes sea diving or ring diving, whatever that ceremony was called, and she comes back and the man goes down on his knees, Brandon in relief that she's back. The perspective that we get from all the characters when they see him. Like, I think Devin thinks to himself that he's cold because he doesn't know, I guess, the relationship between the fool and the king. but then when he changes his mind about what he thought earlier, when he sees Brandon on his knees, Alisan cannot talk himself into killing the man because, again, he's on his knees. Like, someone expressing this much affection, how can they possibly bring themselves to kill this man? And of course, like, Dianora sees what she sees. I think that whole scene there, that made him that much more human. I think it's just brilliant. For me, that all of this made the rest of the book even more powerful. Do we get any Brandon perspective at all? I'm trying to remember. I don't think we do. Right? It's all Dianora between them. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Either her or her manservant or something like that. It's
Salto.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of funny that you mentioned that Devin was starting to see the humanity in Brandon at those later points in the book. When earlier in the book he had to go through this rite of passage, so to speak, where he was actually killing people. They had to go in and kill people and take out I forget who it was, guards or whatever. But it was almost, when you're reading it through, it was almost so like, it was brutal, like, that they had to go in and kill these guys, and it almost felt like just murder hobos going about killing people. And I was just like, okay, why are they able to just get away with this, and why are they? There didn't seem to be a ramification for that act, and he didn't actually explain it until much later in the book. And it was bugging me the whole time I was reading, and I was just like, okay, when is going to be something tied to that killing? And they did it for a reason. They had to set up something and do their whole plan or whatever. But it really was really brutal at the time that it happened, and it really seemed senseless at the time, And but Devin did had some thoughts, and he was thinking about how the man he killed, he was thinking about how he would have interacted with other people, and had he caused pleasure and sorrow in his life, and did he stop that in so that was interesting character growth. But the murders, when they happened, was really like threw me for a loop, because the book wasn't like that until that point. And I was like, oh wow, okay, what's going on here? And then I think we kind of skipped to somebody else, and then we didn't get that explanation until much later. Till you saw the deeper plot of things.
Yeah. And he grappled with the fact of his murder, but I feel like there could have been a little bit more time spent on that, but maybe it was just right. I don't know. Sometimes that can go on for too long, and it's like, okay, move on already. But there's a fine line there, I think.
Yeah, and that might be part of the pacing problems that you guys brought up earlier. Maybe it was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and might have been better suited in a different order or something, or just
I almost certainly wouldn't notice it in a reread, because I know what the book was about, if you know what I mean. I think it's
Sure.
more that sort of feeling of like, why am I doing this? Like, and it went on for so long that you're kind of like, oh, it doesn't seem it felt like it was never going to tie up. In fact, I think, if I remember right, there's literally one chapter that lasts for, in my mind, forever. I was like going along because you like to finish in the end of a chapter if you're reading for a night. I was going, this is a fucking long chapter. Holy hell, this is going on for a while. And again, in my mind, it's going, I'd like to get back to the people and the things that I think are really the centre of the story, and not just seeing in my mind, the justification for what was happening on the other side. And the other thing that sort of comes with her story is, again, I didn't know it at the time when I was reading it, but afterwards, it's this idea that colonialism often gives economic benefits and things to the places that it goes. And again, people from the outside going, or even the colonists basically say, look, we're making life better for you here. Like, I don't actually see what the problem is. But so again, a lot of that stuff was tied up. I didn't see it at the time because I didn't really appreciate what the story was going ahead to do at the time. So, like, I think a lot of those criticisms I had of my first read probably don't stand up to your read at all.
That could very well happen. Yeah, I can see that. Because the ending was spectacular. Like, the last 100 or so pages were really, really cool. They were fast paced. They were wrapping stuff up. They were bringing story threads together, and it was all starting to make sense. And I really enjoyed the last 100 pages or so. Like, I was so into it.
Yeah. On the subject of like the benefits from colonialism, that's an interesting point, because I was thinking throughout the book, it's sort of given, I think, that the world will be better without the tyrants, but when they leave, what is the state that the palm will be in, right? I think there's not a lot of contemplation about that. And sure, like, we've conveniently made Alison the king, and like he might expand to unify palm and so on, but there is this aspect of that seems like a good and mighty ideal, but I'm not saying this is not true, but I'm not convinced that is the only or the best approach for this. Like, for instance, if Brandon hadn't done the thing he did to Tigana, he could have been a good ruler for the palm, perhaps. So there are some aspects there of the situation that aren't fully discussed in the book, but I thought about them a lot, because we've had a lot of turmoil in our world where one tyrant was replaced by another tyrant. Like, they thought they were getting a better situation, but they really weren't. So it's there was this background sense of like, are we sure that we are aiming for the right thing here? But that wasn't really, I guess, a part of the themes of the story. So that was fine, but it was something that I was thinking about.
You gotta wonder what was Brandon doing that led to his son's death. Because it wasn't really explored, I don't think, that part of the history, because his son died. I think it was some kind of military action or something like that. But what decisions did Brandon make to put his son in that situation? And obviously he was torn about it. He was very mentally torn about it. He lashed out in the way he did with his sorcery, but and I'm sure that on some levels he was blaming himself for it, but he chose to lash out instead and blame a whole country. But I don't think it was really explored, like, what would like you said, could Brandon have been a good ruler and good for the palm? But if that didn't happen, like, was he being a bad ruler, and was his son in that situation because of poor decisions that he made? And would he have gone on making poor decisions if his son was still alive? He might have been a good ruler now that he's had all this contemplation, change of heart towards Dianara and all that stuff, but yeah, that's a road unexplored, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's interesting also how the motivation for Brandon to cast his curse, and there is a discussion, or like he rants at the other tyrant. He says, "I despise that man because he's just ambitious and he has no passion." So I think that was a very profound moment for me, because like on the subject of colonialism, a lot of the changes and the loss of culture that came with colonialism was due to casual cruelty. It wasn't planned, it wasn't for vengeance, it wasn't for a deeper or like a higher purpose, or like a more personal or a passionate purpose. It just happened, and it was allowed to happen in some ways. So I think that is maybe worse than what Brandon did, like this crime of passion versus the erasure that comes from casual cruelty. So that exchange, I think that difference between the two tyrants that was pointed out to us, that was also a very interesting moment in the book.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah.
Especially since the Barbadians, that's what they call it, right?
Yeah.
We're so obviously Normans, Vikings who were raiding Italy and took it over, actually. So that's because the Normans took over Sicily and Naples in medieval Italy, and that is exactly what the Barbadians were doing here for the most part. So it's interesting how Guy Kay chose to represent that aspect of it.
Yeah. So I'm not familiar with Italian history, but are there any other connections to real world history that you noticed, Jared? Or anybody else?
Yeah, that was the I think it was 11th century or 12th century when the Normans took over Sicily and Naples, the very south, the boot of Italy there, and that conquest eventually tied the kingdom of Sicily and Naples was eventually tied in with the Holy Roman Empire, and they were vassals of the Holy Roman Emperor, who what was the guy's name? The other sorcerer, I can't remember.
Alberico, I think.
Alberico, yeah.
Yeah.
He was referring to his emperor, the whole time, and that's basically the Holy Roman Emperor that was in charge of all the areas of a lot of Germany and some areas of northern Italy as well, and in some areas of eastern France and so on. It was a large territory that was the Holy Roman Empire, and the Normans who took over those areas were vassals of that emperor, and so that was the direct correlation to that. And then the whole fact of the Palm being all these independent little kingdoms that basically represented all the independent little city-states in Italy during those times as well. And they were always fighting with each other, just like they were in this history as well, to their own detriment, because then it made it easier for larger emperors to walk in. France did it a couple times, and so did the Holy Roman Empire as well. But and then the troubadours, the historical troubadours, wandering minstrels who brought about these ideas of courtly romance and courtly love to the various different barons and what have you, that was spread by them, and that was they spread these ideas of a knight having virtue and a knight having nobility, so to speak, which so it wasn't the nobility who came up with being noble as a way of life. It was actually these troubadours who romanticized that idea of somebody can be more noble than their subjects, and they really enhanced that idea and made that into an aspect of the whole courtly love and how a man's supposed to court a woman, and bring about all this romantic idea of love, that it's not just a compact, it's not just a contract, that it's that there is more, there's more heart involved with it and stuff like that. And so that's the history of the troubadours is a very interesting thing, and I hope he gets more into it in A Song for Our Bone as well, because it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for that, Jared.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. Shifting gears a little bit, maybe quite a lot. I want to talk about the ending a little bit, the very end, not the epilogue, but the fact that Celto chooses not to tell Alisan that the person who killed Brandon was his father, I guess to save him the pain of knowing that he was trapped there for 20 years. What did you guys think of that?
Say that again? I missed that. What?
The Celto in the end, when he decides not to tell what's his name, Alisan, that Rune, the fool who killed Brandon, was his father.
Right. Oh yeah.
And it was a very interesting scene for me, because first when they first walk up to him, Celto thinks to himself that he can now have his revenge, and I wasn't sure. I thought the revenge was going to be that he won't tell them that the man was his father, but it turned out to be that he would have had his revenge if he had told him that this was your father, and he was protecting the guy from more grief. I thought that was a very profound scene, but I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yes, and Celto, I'm trying to remember now. It was like 3 months ago I read this.
Just giving me as well.
Postponed the reading quite a lot.
The fool being his father.
Mm-hmm.
That was fascinating that came about, and it makes sense for what we knew of Brandon's cruelty prior to his character arc and evolution, what have you. But I think telling him would have been cruel, because that he went through a lot of, talk about getting your identity and losing and having your whole psyche just destroyed. That is the worst of it right there, that the fool having it done to him. And so how would you deal with that after all you've been through to get to the point where you're at and all the psychological pain you've gone through, to throw that on there as well, to think that your father wasn't dead all this time but was pretty much dead inside. That would be pain on top of pain.
Yeah,
Is it also a case of like there's another withholding of the truth or withholding of who you are, and like almost like the cycle repeating itself in a sort of other weird perverse way, but in this case sort of have the readership on side and say to themselves, actually in this case it's fine.
Yeah, yeah. In this case, it's fine. And I think I just got a brief glimpse of the author's notes while we were talking. I didn't finish reading it, but he says that what Sato does in the end goes back to the epigraph about the flame remembering. So this one is sort of the just right, remember just right aspect of it. So you don't give enough that the man will burn himself out, like you were talking about before, Jared. But also what was done to Rune, I think or Valentin, sort of what was done to Tigana in a bit of a miniature, if you will, right? Like a tiny spark of identity remains and another person's identity was sort of channeled or imposed on him. So that almost microcosm of what was done to Tigana, I think, as a representation of that. And he's a prince of Tigana too. I think that, again, that metaphor and imagery is pretty brilliant.
That's very good, yeah.
What about Alison's relationship with his mother? When she goes to her deathbed, she curses at him for not having done her version of... Oh, and that leads to, I think, Alison's conversation with Katriana. The extremes to which she pushes herself is because she finds out that her father ran away before any of the battles in Tigana, right? And so she's trying to make up for her father's deeds. And Alison has this conversation with her about how they must have compassion for what they did, for what they were trying to protect. Maybe he wasn't trying to protect himself. Maybe he was trying to protect his newborn daughter. And similarly, like, he's also struggling with his relationship with his mom and how she doesn't understand what he wants to do. And yeah, that whole tie-in of that theme, I think is pretty fantastic. I've said those words a lot in this discussion, but I love this book.
Yeah, I think his mother sounded the most Italian out of all of them.
Like that.
Yeah.
I could just picture, I curse you from her deathbed, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was, I'm trying to remember what exactly she said. I don't remember exactly what she said to him, but yeah, she definitely didn't agree with the way he was handling things. But I don't know. The whole time I was just like, yeah, but you know, I don't know. We were so on his side by that point. It was hard to hear such disagreement from his own mother at the time. She seemed a little harsh and a little removed from what was actually going on in the country. And maybe that's just because she was on her deathbed and she was sick and couldn't really get too involved or what have you. So I think it was just one more thing to add to his trauma, make you feel for him as a character, and one more thing that says, don't tell him about his father, because look what he's been through already.
Yeah. Salto showed him all that compassion without even knowing about his relationship with his mother. So, what about all of the side characters, the prince that they trapped? Oh, that's another, I guess, sub-theme in the story, with the loss of freedom there that he feels willing to subject, that he was willing to subject the wizard to, because he feels like he has no choice. There's that guy, and then the duke who plays dead and comes back whose death, supposed death, kicks all of this off. Any thoughts about those two characters?
I felt bad for that mage.
Yeah.
I felt bad for him. He really was. He was a very sympathetic character. I thought. Because he voiced his objections over and over again. Couldn't really do much about it. He had a certain loss of free will at that point, and you wonder. It just brought into question, how far do you go with your rebellion against a greater evil? How deep do you go with your own? How much do you justify your own little acts of evil to combat a greater threat? And that's a tough question to answer. There were points where I was like, wow, they shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a little too convenient that it kind of worked out. Maybe it's a little too nice. That he eventually ends up being on his side voluntarily. But I could see that being an area where some people might have a problem with.
Yeah. And he does eventually let the man go when he goes after Katriana by himself. But yeah, the whole duration in between, I did kind of question the decision to do this. Like, yes, at what cost? And that like what you said, Jared, like what price are you willing to pay, and how much of yourself are you willing to let go to get to your goal, right? And he does come around, and I think maybe that journey was necessary to explore that theme, perhaps. But there's something like this in the third book of the Fiona Tapestry too, but I liked the resolution of that a bit more. But yeah. Also, Katriana, I guess we haven't really talked about her, but she was another character that I found it difficult to like. And I felt like there was a lot of signaling from other characters that she's wonderful, but I couldn't get behind her, like, wherever she was on the page. So
she does some questionable stuff. Like it's not quite so straightforward. But again, to me, she's a freedom fighter. She is somebody that's tied to the cause, and therefore her actions are so in her head. Her actions and the things she does are not actually important as long as the cause progresses, if you know what I mean. But it does make her sort of difficult to either root for or be the object of affection, or to be sort of like, there's almost that sort of playing with the romance plot to basically say, like, I don't know if that's is really where he should be going, or that kind of thing. But ultimately, she goes from being I think her character archetype sort of changes throughout the story anyway, because she goes from being this sort of minstrel kind of person, object of affection, to being a very hardened kind of person, at the center of the fight. So her character arc, like sort of Steve said at the start, I can see why people wouldn't identify with any of them, because they're sort of problematic. Like this idea of tyrants, people fighting for freedom, doing things that they can't do anymore, sort of can be a problem.
Yeah, yep. I agree. I except for Alison and Beard. Well, I guess that leaves Devon and Katriana pretty much from that troop. Yeah, I wasn't too fond of the young ones. I loved Rovigo and his daughters and his wife. They weren't on the page for very long, but I loved them. Especially Alice, is that the name of the elder daughter?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I loved her character introduction. Who else? I feel like there's one other character that I'm forgetting to bring up. Roviko, Katriana. Oh, Chris has stopped recording. Okay. He'll come back. But yeah, speaking of rooting for that, the last battle I think was pretty brilliant because at no point was I clear on who to root for, and when these and I couldn't decide. I didn't know how this was going to go. I didn't know what would bring it to a point where I could be happy for all the characters that I was behind. But in the end, when Alison goes up to the hill where Brandon died, there's a note about how they didn't look like they had just won a victory. There was no sense of triumph in them. They just looked like they were at the end of a long, weary journey, which they very much were. And I feel like that was true. There wasn't a weary journey for me, but like throughout the battle, it's like, yeah, this is not a clean ending. It's not a clean victory for anybody. It's just a lot of dead people and one thing that they wanted to accomplish at a great price. But it's done now, and you can move on. So that I think that is again like very different from maybe other books that I've read, because there are clearly people that you want to win or not win in any battles that you might follow in fantasy books, to sort of bring it to a point where I couldn't figure out who should win, except for maybe I mean, I couldn't even root for the people from Tigana, because like if they win, Brandon dies, and that means Dianora is in a world of pain. So it was just a very difficult situation.
Yeah, I didn't have that much problem with it, because I kind of thought, as much as Brandon changed throughout the narrative, what he did was still horrible, and I didn't have a problem with him dying at the end. It's tragic for Dianora, but that's really what she wanted to start out with.
Yeah.
I mean, she changed her mind, but it was really, it really wrapped up, very well, because he made you start to feel for these characters that are not the best morally in the world, that he gave us this inner conflict that we didn't really want to see anybody die at the end, but we knew somebody had to, because there was no way Brandon can just not basically pay for what he did. And and you had to keep in mind that what he did was pretty horrible. Even though your emotions were starting to get twisted in the other way, to maybe hope that he would somehow make it out of there. And Lesson had to win. He is the rightful ruler, and his victory wasn't rah standing on top of the corpse with a sword held high in the air and everything like that. It was bittersweet. It was a necessary win that had a lot of sadness accompanied with it, but satisfactory for the reader, I think, in the end.
Yeah. The ending was very satisfying. So, Chris, I was talking about how I couldn't figure out whom to root for throughout the battles. Did you have anything to say about that?
I mean, it's hard not to root for the people that you've sort of been following. I mean, it is sort of painted that there are good guys and bad guys, although I think it is strange that it's at the last point that you start to kind of think, actually, there are no good guys here, really, at the heart of it. It's like conflict begets bad decisions, delivers hurt, all of those things, and like nobody really wins in the end, even though like at the heart, all you're wanting, I think, as the reader, is that for this place to exist again. You know, regardless of who's leading it and ruling it, etc., that the unjustness was really in that it was taken away. So that was sort of my drive towards the end, of regardless of who was left standing or fallen or anything, and just get back to playing a bit of music. I mean, you know, that's where the story started. That's where I sort of wanted to go back to. Let's be a travelling band again. You know, be a travelling Wilburys. You know, be a super group, and just get back out there and entertain people. You know, because that is sort of what life is, and battles and all of that kind of stuff is the antithesis of it in a lot of ways. A lot of hurt and heartache kind of goes like that. So, like, I do sort of agree with you insofar as like, there isn't necessarily somebody that you're kind of going, oh, there's a good side and a bad side of this, because I think both justifications were kind of in there, but at the same stage you just sort of wanted there to be a cut, nearly a way that everybody survived in some way, and the fact that our main people just died in the end is almost like a duality. Basically says that like the land has a chance to grow again or start again, you know, with new people and new roles, and set up for a sequel. Which never came.
Yeah. Which never came. So, I guess one of the last things I want to bring up for discussion are some of the aspects of the magic and the creation myths of the world. I loved my favorite was Iana created and named all the stars, and she remembers them. I think she names them every day or something. Like there's some aspect of memory tied with that creation myth, which I think is a fantastic thing to weave into the story about memory, and the need to remember. And then, of course, the night walkers. We didn't really talk about them with the beard and the battle with the night walkers. I'm not sure that there is much to talk about. It was just a very interesting battle and aspect of magic, but I just want to bring it up in case you guys had any thoughts there.
Yeah, I don't know. I like I like some of the creation myths that were there, but I kind of thought that they were kind of very secondary to the main story. You know, they were symbolic in a lot of ways, but I don't think they were super integral, you know, to the story itself. They were cool. You know,
yeah,
I love a good mythology.
Yeah,
much as anybody else. You know,
it was a good backdrop to the story, I think.
Yeah,
and it was interesting. So, just the stars, but everything else was.
It sort of give it another layer. Again, this idea that it would go another place, if you know what I mean, or another way, because it was like another layer of mysticism or another layer of mystery or another layer of magic and lore in it, and you kind of thought, right, okay, this could, and created a bit of peril again in the middle of the story when maybe it needed it, a bit of impetus, you know.
Yeah. The one moment that stood out to me in terms of the mythology was the dream that Devon has, where Alison is a Daeon when after he's met him for the first time or something. So that kind of sent chills, but it didn't like really pan out to anything other than, you know, finding out that Alison is actually the prince of his hometown. But but that dream, that like tying in of the gods with the people, I think that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Very nice.
Any other topics that we haven't talked about yet about the book? Or
Sexy times.
Oh yeah, what did you guys think of that?
awesome, awesome,
Pass.
awesome.
Awesome.
Great.
And they get a lot of criticism in the book. The very famed
It
criticism.
wasn't that much.
But there wasn't that much.
Yeah.
There was two of them.
It wasn't that much.
There was two of them.
It was two of them, and it was just, and one of them was kind of, I don't know. It was. I thought it was. One of them was kind of beautiful. The other one was kind of
Creepy.
The other one was kind of like, whoa, okay, a little S&M-y or whatever, but yeah, whatever. It wasn't that bad. It wasn't that much. It's just
Yeah, because a lot of people say that they kind of show that the book's sexist, and like, I don't know, but because effectively it's Katriana doing it to him at the start. You know what I mean? She's kind of keeping him quiet and controlling him, essentially by doing it. So, and he's just a young, kind of impressionable man. He's like, oh my god, this is just what's happening to my body, kind of that kind of awkwardness.
It's the greatest closet ever. I mean, but yeah, I had no problem with any of the scenes in there. They were fine. They were good.
Yeah, I agree. And I think another criticism I saw was like the sex scene is gratuitous. Maybe the level of detail in the Katriana and Devon sex scene, there wasn't detail in the other one, but just I think that was pretty much just a mention of it. But maybe it could have done with slightly less, but I think that was sort of necessary, right, to sort of set up, I don't know about necessary, but I can see what the purpose of it is. And therefore, I don't know that it's gratuitous. I don't strictly agree with that assessment either. So, yeah, it didn't make me uncomfortable. I thought it was okay. Yeah.
No, it's definitely got to be there for the HBO adaptation.
Well, it really gives Devon motivation at the start. Like he thinks it's a love thing. You know, it a lot of the early part of the book is about him chasing her and kind of following her. And maybe if that hasn't happened, you're kind of going, why is he still with them? Or you know, why is he still following them to that point? So it definitely has a purpose in that sense. And then the later one obviously is about different relationships, etc., and is kind of maturing in some ways. But yeah.
Yeah, it's whatever.
It is, yeah. It's one of those, but it's so often talked about, though.
That's the thing. How much it is talked about. I thought every other chapter would have a sex scene or something.
Yeah.
There are two, and they don't go on for very long.
Yeah, I know. It just seems to be one of those things that people glom onto.
Yeah,
and that they just don't let it go. It's when it's really not that big a deal, and like you said, Chris, it really moves the story forward in the first encounter with Devon and her Katriana, and so it really moves the story forward in a lot of meaningful different ways, not just the fact that he's attached to her now and that they have that connection, but also because it brought him together with that troupe in a different way than the relationship he had with them before, because he is brought into the fold. He's brought into as a confidant, and he's a part of this rebellion now in a grander way than just being a hanger-on and just being a talented dude on the stage, you know. And so it was very integral at that point. And I don't know if I don't know. It just seems to be one of those things that people glom onto without taking it into the context of its narrative importance. And you know, so that's
I often wonder if it's people who either didn't finish the book, you know what I mean, they kind of got that point that I found that uncomfortable to read and then don't get its context in much the same way, or people that read it out of context. You know, people say, oh, read this isn't well written or something like that, because it is something that could be sort of chopped out and kind of went, here, what do you think of this? And it is sort of awkward, but I mean, again, he's a very awkward young man at that stage. He's very quite young, and you know, it is a bit fumbly.
It reminds me of the fervor over the Covenant book, the first one, the Lord Falsbane, and how everybody focuses on the assault, and it's just like, and that's it. They don't focus on the ramifications of it through the next 6 books, you know. And it's just like, it's so important to the whole story, and it's a redemption arc, and you got to take that into account. And you know, and this it's just funny how people they don't focus on the reasons behind writing the scene. They focus on this scene was bad because of this, and I hate Thomas Covenant because of this, but it's like, well, you can't just hate a character because of one paragraph. You got to take everything into context, and that's the same thing with here. If you're not taking into context Devon and Katriana's characterization and that circumstance leading to a important point in the story to move forward with the story narratively, then you're missing the point.
Yeah. And there's also this
Sorry, didn't mean to rant.
No,
Yes, you did.
Okay, I did, yeah. You're right.
Or what Chris said. And what was I going to say? There's also the aspect of, like, the other thing to observe is whether the author is condoning the act being written about or not, right? Like, if something is uncomfortable or poorly, like makes you feel poorly, like the Thomas Covenant example, for instance, like, there is sure the repercussions in the story and the larger context of the story are important, but also if it's something you don't like, are you saying that the author is condoning it or not? Like, I feel like you can usually tell what the purpose is, and it's not the author saying, oh, isn't this such a wonderful thing to happen? So I don't anyway, like, I think it needs to go deeper than that. Criticism at a surface level like that is not helpful. But also, as sex scenes go, this one wasn't all that. Like, maybe it's just in the romance genre that they get quite so detailed as they do, or is sex scenes in fantasy not a thing? Is that why people latch onto this? Because and again, like, the way people talked about it, I thought it would go on for pages and pages. I think, if I remember correctly, it lasted a page, maybe a page and a half at most.
Something like that,
Yeah.
It might be something to the fact that we don't really see descriptive sex scenes in traditionally published novels. I think it's become something that if you read a bit more self-pub, it's kind of made its way into that a bit more, and maybe people are more accepting.
Well, damn it, Aragorn didn't have it. Why did we have to read it now?
See?
Right.
You might have made my point for me. Where is it in Harry Potter? In fact, all that fanfic stuff, would there be no need for any of it if they'd have just included it in the first place? Philosopher's Stone, page 7. Go.
Yep, stick with the kissing, no sex. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Harry and Desire. Hedwig.
Yeah. Stuck up on Puritan Americans. That's who I blame.
Oh, God.
All right. Any other topics for discussion about this book? Cool. I think we covered it. Thank you so much for joining the discussion. Outros, Chris, do you want to go first?
Chris, Chronicles. Chronicles of Chris. Speculative Speculations, pagetune.com. Jared.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Pagetune.com. Speculative Speculations. One day, Chronicle of Chris will have me on his channel. I know he will. And then
I might make a video. Yeah, indeed. That might be a good way to bring it back, Jared. That's actually quite a good idea.
And the Fantasy Thinker YouTube channel, and where I always have Vasher on.
Yeah. Yes, you can find me all those places too, and on my YouTube channel, Reading by the Rainy Mountain. That's pretty much it. Look out for other reading groups that we're doing on the Page Chewing Forum. We've got a Malazan one going, we've got an SF Masterworks one going, and we're going to do at least another 2. Oh, and we've got a Discworld one going too.
Discworld, literary side hustle, short fiction side hustle.
That too. Oh yeah, where we're going to read the Fishing with Grandma Machi next, and then Reeve the Just. Go on, Chris. What was next on you?
The Oscar Films project is on there. Yes,
we got the Oscar Films project.
Yeah. And we might read some more Guy Gabriel Kay if you're into that. So so check out the Patreon forum. Join us for these discussions. They're open to anybody interested.
Shadow.
Oh yeah, that too.
we're only like 7 books deep in that. It's fine, but
yeah. And we've only been doing it for a year and a half, so it was perfectly normal for me to have forgotten to mention it.
I see a bookmark that's past the start. Yeah, look at that.
Jared's already started reading Stormed Fortress.
Oh yeah.
I always read the day before and the day off.
And actually never finish it. That's fine.
I actually
that too. I'm still reading. I'm still halfway through Taylor's Not. Anyway.
I believe it.
So thank you so much for listening. We'll see you soon in whatever next discussion video you catch us in. Bye. Thank you.